parade, at the history fairs, was always interested in local history. Had passed at a very young age. And his brother John came to our board meeting a couple of weeks ago and made a heartfelt presentation that I felt all of you needed to hear. So John, if you'll come up, I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Talk louder because we're taping it too.
Okay. Okay, thank you for letting me come here tonight. I just wanted to share a little bit about my brother Mike, where he came from, who he was, and his relationship to history. It started at a very young age. Mike was born into a family of 8 boys. He was number 6. My parents had us all in a span of 10 years, so we were all very close. We were raised in the village of Sherwood, just not far from here. And it was a very small town at that time. You couldn't get away with nothing as a kid because everybody knew everybody. Now, I tried to put a timeline together on my first accounts of history, what was going on in his head at a young age. And I would have been 9 or 10 years old, I think. He was 2 years older than me, so he was 11 or 12. And I was in his bedroom one day, and there was a pop can up on the shelf in his room. And I said, "Why do you have the pop can up there?" And he said, "Well, they don't make them like that anymore, so I'm going to save it." And I thought, okay. Well, a short time after that, it wasn't very long, I went back in his room and there was a couple more out there. And I thought, okay. And a short time after that, I called him into my room and I had a beer can up there. But he was like, "That's cool. You save the old beer cans, I'll save the old pop cans, and we'll see how many we get." Now, I want to show you something, because when I found this in his house, he had all his pop cans packed away, hundreds of them, in boxes in the basement. But this one wasn't there. He had it up on the shelf. And I think it was really special to him. But that's the can. There was one other thing that made me smile when I found this can, and that's because I know where it came from. See, the little general store in Sherwood, when we were kids, they always marked the price of all their goods with a black chalky marker. And immediately when I found this can, I looked at the top. In a black chalky marker, it says 15. So somebody paid 15 cents for this 40 plus years ago. I thought that was just a childhood memory I had to share. After that, so our collections grew for a few years, and then by the time we got to our mid-teens, mid to later teens, there was an event that changed, I think, what Mike was thinking in his head, or what was going on, the thoughts he had, because this event, he lived the rest of his life. There was an old farmer across the street by the name of Wenzelakis. He lived down the road across the street a ways, and sadly, this old farmer passed away one day. And Mike came to me and said, "There's going to be an auction, so you got to save your money." And I'm like, okay. He said, "There's 100 years of old stuff in there. We have to get some of it, and we have to save it." I'm like, okay, so I don't know if we were doing chores for another farmer that lived across the street the other way, baling hay and whatever we did, but we saved our money and we went to the auction. Now, I had heard of auctions before, I think, but I had never been to one, so I didn't know what I was doing. So Mike was helping me out. We were walking through the house, and I said, how does this work? He said, well, just pick out a couple things you like, and they're going to bring it out front, and you're going to bid on it. And I'm like, okay. So we stood next to each other at that auction, and we each bought a couple of things. Now, one item he bought was an item called a snitchelbunk. I'm wondering how many people out here ever heard that word before. Family doesn't count. Okay, so we have one that I see. It's not a common word, it's not a common item. But Mike bought this snitchelbunk, and then from talking with the surviving members of old Wenzel Eckes' family, I believe, is where the story came from. They said Wenzel used to carve axe handles and pick handles on this snitchelbunk. And he carved all the axe handles and pick handles and shovel handles that supplied the High Cliff lime quarry when it was in operation in the early 20th century. Now, Mike was blown away by this story. And he wrote all that information down, and he took that snitchelbunk and he donated it to the High Cliff Museum. Because he said, we have to save it. I thought that was a pretty remarkable thing. There was one other little thing I want to share with you. Was before he took it there, he did one other thing. He said, John, we have to show him how it works. So he wanted to demonstrate it. So I took this picture of him sitting at the snitchelbunk. This is really a great picture because he was playing the part. He went and put on his leather mountain man hat, his blue jean jacket, his old boots. And I believe he bought the draw knife, which is what you use to carve the pick handles. And he was demonstrating how it worked. We couldn't find a long piece of wood, but so we stole a piece of wood off of Dad's wood pile. Sorry, Mom. I have a couple of these. If you could pass these around through the crowd some, that'd be great. So I thought that was, we were in our mid to later teens when he did something like this, and I thought that was pretty remarkable. After that, it showed what he was thinking in his head. I don't know if it was months after that or if it was a few years, I'm not sure. But another elderly person in our village, our small village, must have passed away. And he came to me and he said, John, he said, all the old people of Sherwood are dying. He said, and they know all this history of our little town. He said, we have to go to them and we have to talk to them. And we have to get this information. So he started doing that. And he started doing that, and he did it the rest of his life for the next 35 years. Not seriously, but he would do it in his spare time. He would call him up and say, can I come and sit and talk with you? And at that same time, he started collecting Sherwood memorabilia, artifacts, whatever he could pick up along the way, and he did that the rest of his life. He also was very involved in the Broeren history. Our family history is quite extensive, and he was a huge part of that. He once took a trip to Holland even to try and further and gather more information on our family, and he met with distant relatives, and he brought back names and photos, and he even had an aerial photo of the village that my my ancestors came from 160 years ago. And he's got it pinpointed to the houses on this aerial photo. The Broerens lived here before coming to America. And he's got all these houses labeled on them. And I thought that's pretty remarkable. That's good stuff. So we're very, very proud of him for that. Then there was Appleton history. I'm going to back up 1 second. Mike was an avid adventurer. He traveled the country on his gold wing motorcycle, and some of you know that. He took hundreds of trips. And he took thousands of photos. Some of his photos are quite breathtaking. He had thousands packed in boxes in his home. But some of his photos were really spectacular. And one of his specialties was self-portraits. He took hundreds of those. I have one on the back table he took that approximately 2 weeks before he passed away. One of his adventure hikes out at High Cliff State Park, he would prop up his camera and then he'd go run in front of it. And they actually turned out really quite well. And then, I was going to his Appleton history. If you put things in a time frame, Mike really hadn't been collecting Appleton history for an extended period of time, but he had gathered some really great things. And I was thinking, why did he join? Because he was so busy with family and Sherwood history. Why did he join Appleton Historical Club? And I think it's because of all people like you. Being from a small town of Sherwood, there were very few people that he could share 40 years of all this information that was bouncing around in his head. Now he had a whole room full of people he could share the same passions and interests that he had. And I think maybe that's why he joined and started gathering. So my family came here tonight. I wonder if I could get my family just to stand up for a second, those that are here. I've got my mother and father, and my wife, 2 of my children, 1 of my brothers, and my sister. And our family came here tonight because Mike was so passionate about the fact that things should be saved. He always said, we have to save this. So our family would like to give any and all of Mike's historical artifacts and memorabilia to the Appleton Historical Society, because Mike said we have to save it, and we know that you guys will do your best. So we will make arrangements in the next few weeks to transfer these items to your board members, and we hope someday they will be displayed for the public